Hello, this is Tim Congdon, Chairman of the Institute of International Monetary Research at the University of Buckingham. I'm introducing the next video about the global monetary scene. It's late July 2020, and as in the last few videos, I'm going to be focusing on the United States of America, where in the year to June, the growth of the quantity of money on the broadly defined M3 measure was 26.7%. This is an all-time record in peacetime, if we exclude the very early years of the American Republic when they had a hyperinflation. The implications of this for the American economy and the world economy are, in my view, hugely important for the next few years. Critically and vitally for the future of the economy, there's going to be some inflation to follow this. I'm going to be very much developing points that I've argued in an academic paper for the World Economics Journal. It's late July. The issue of the journal was March to June 2020, so I assume it'll be available very soon. I'm going to go back in this presentation to Milton Friedman, as I've done on other occasions. And let's just remind us that he was one of the leading advocates of the monetary theory of national income determination. Roughly speaking, changes in the quantity of money are maybe not equal to, but very similar to changes in the rate of growth of national income, changes in the rate of growth of quantity of money associated with similar changes in the rate of growth of national income. So that when you look at long runs of data, you find occasions when money and national income are out of kilter, when the velocity of circulation changes. But over the medium and long run, there is mean reversion. Money and national income come back together. Now, this idea was put together by Friedman really very much in the 1950s. And he gave some lectures in New York, Miller Lectures in 1959, where he set out some of these ideas in more detail. He at that point was 47 at the peak of his career, and in terms of productivity and insight and so on. And he proposed this rule that the right thing for policy was to have stable growth of the quantity of money, where he meant the quantity of money broadly defined, and he included in that all time deposits of the American banking system. That, by the way, corresponds to the M3 measure I talked about at the start of the video. It's not published nowadays by the Federal Reserve, but by a research company called Shadow Government Statistics, to whom we're very grateful. Now, Friedman also said in these 1959 Miller Lectures that although money and national income grew together in the medium term and so on, that there had been a tendency in America for money to rise a little bit faster than income because of the growth of financial assets and the financial system, so that transactions in financial assets grew rather more than national income, and then so did the quantity of money in line with that financialization, you might want to call it. Okay, so that's what was said by Friedman back in 1959. Let's just look at some facts. And the evidence I'm about to present is in fact the critical heart, the basis for the argument that I make in my article, my paper for World Economics. This shows you the annual rates of change of the quantity of money, broadly defined, going back to the end of the First World War. It doesn't come up to 2020, but it comes up to 2019. You can see the two series are closely related. In fact, the average annual rate of change of the quantity of money in this period was 6.6%, and the average annual rate of increase in nominal national income was 6%. So there's this gap of 0.6%, which fits in with the financialization idea, but basically the story works. I'm going to split up this period into two. As I said, Friedman's lectures were in 1959, so that's just 40 years into this period. And you can see here what happened in those 40 years, from the end of the First World War to 1959. And the obvious feature is very marked volatility in the growth of both money and national income. This is a very turbulent period. At the end of the First World War, there was a boom and a bust, roaring 20s, then the Great Depression, then the Second World War, and then the beginnings of stabilization in the 1950s. But a very unstable period. The average annual growth rate of money in this period was 5.3%. The average annual growth rate of national income was 5%. And it was on the basis of that sort of picture that Friedman recommended there should be stable growth of the quantity of money. Now let's look at the 60 years from the late 1950s. And you can see that the scale, by the way, on the y-axis is the same in the two charts. You can see far greater stability in the growth of money and national income in the last 60 years than in that very turbulent first half of the 20th century. Now, since 1958, the average growth rate of money has been 7.2%, and the average growth rate of national income has been 6.4%, very much in line with Friedman's suggestion of a 1% secular fall in velocity. What I've done here is just to put these two charts together on the same slide. You can see the much greater stability in the last 60 years compared with the first 40 years. And surely to me, but maybe not to you, I don't know. This subject puzzles me sometimes, the way people react to it. But surely the stability of the second part of this, the 60 years to today, is the result of more stable growth of the quantity of money and the instability of nominal GDP and then output, then inflation and so on in the first 40 years reflected the instability in money growth, and that contrast explains why Friedman wanted stable growth for the quantity of money. Essentially, the basic ideas in the monetary theory of national income are correct. There's another way of presenting this evidence. In its simplest form, what the monetary theory says is that take an economy, its ability to produce goods and services is a given. The quantity of money jumps, say, by 25, 50%. Then there may be a period of adjustment to that in which there's a bit of a boom and rundown of inventories and people a bit dropped in unemployment and so on. But then eventually there's a return to equilibrium and the price level has risen by 25 or 50%. Proportional increase, so-called proportionality hypothesis. Now, I just said that this is qualified at the moment by the Friedman's idea of the growth of financial sector, so then you get this secular fall in velocity. Let's then look at the numbers for the change in velocity. Actually, in the period since 1951 is the period I've chosen here. Really, that's when the instability of the first half of the 20th century starts to come to an end. Now, what's striking, I think, about this histogram, the histogram shows the frequency of different values of a particular variable, very important in statistical work, is that you can see that most of the values are very close to the mean value, which is around about a fall of about 0.75% a year in velocity over this period of around about 70 years. This is one of the key items of evidence that I use in my article in World Economics. The distribution of the change in velocity is what economists say, statisticians say, it's roughly normally distributed. The normal distribution is the most common kind of statistical distributions. It's roughly normally distributed. Here is a chart of the time series chart of the change in velocity. Yes, occasionally there are large movements for that, but when there's a large move down in the velocity, it's offset by a move upwards in the next 2 or 3 years. That's what the meaning of this phrase, mean reversion, that's what its meaning is. This quality of the similarity of the growth rates of money and income also applies to wealth. And you'd expect that it's very, very logical that as the profits increase in line with national income, as rents go up, so should the value of corporate equity, housing stock, the value of commercial property, commercial real estate, and so on, as national income rises. And now we come to 2020. So we have this 26.7% rise in broad money, completely out of line with the last 50 or 60 years. There's nothing like it in the last 50 or 60 years. There's, of course, in the second quarter been a big fall in American national output. So we're going to have a quite extraordinary change in velocity of circulation by the standards of the last 50, 60 years. I've set out a lot of evidence to say that this series is mean reversing. If that is true, if the quantity of money continues to grow in the next few quarters and years, then at some point, the big collapse in the velocity of circulation that we've seen in the last few months, because of this surge in the rate of growth of the quantity of money, will be offset by a jump in the velocity of circulation. If it's a similar kind of jump of 30, 40%, what does that mean? I.e., that is the rate of growth of nominal GDP. What does that mean for inflation? Now, look, I don't know what's going to happen. What I would do is, I've gone through this evidence. It's not very difficult. The last time we had a number like this was, in fact, in 1943, when the increase in the quantity of money broadly defined went up briefly to about 30%. Now, it was wartime. The American economy had a lot of spare capacity because obviously it was just after the 1930s, and 1930s were very depressed. There was, in 1944 and 45, inflation was dampened down by price controls, rapid growth of output. At the end of the Second World War, 9 million people working in the armed forces had to return to civilian life. A huge change in the labour market, rather similar, I suggest, to the 20 million people in America who lost their jobs in the second quarter, well, really from February up until May, June 2020 because of the coronavirus. What then happened in America after the Second World War? Inflation in early 1947 reached 20%. And to stop inflation rising even further, there had to be a period of 2 years in 1948 and 49 when there was no money growth at all. So those two things, the jump in the inflation rate to 20% and the stagnation in money for 2 years, then meant that velocity returned to its mean reverting trend. if one takes a quantity theory perspective, one has to be expecting in America a large rise in inflation in the next 2 or 3 years. Just point out, remember what happened 43, 47, it was almost a 4-year lag, but eventually it came through. And yet, the Federal Reserve is not thinking in these terms at all. Not at all. Let me read from the minutes of the 9th to 10th of June meeting of the Federal Open Market Committee. The forward-looking simulations from the Fed's research staff suggested that the committee would have to maintain a highly accommodative, that means stimulatory, low interest rates, don't worry, quantitative easing, and so on. Highly accommodative financial conditions for many years, to quicken meaningfully the recovery from the current severe downturn. Notice this phrase, for many years. I wonder if they really know. On the evidence I've presented, the problem in the next few years will not be deflation, but inflation. Thank you.